I'm sharing with you tonight two of my projects, and they're the only two I've ever won anything. So I'm sharing with you my whole story. So these are two projects. One, and they're totally different. One is a river course in Kiowa Island. It's basically from the Low Countries in South Carolina. The other one is from the Upper Peninsula in Michigan. So they are like A and Z. What I love to do when I start doing a project is I have to have a story, and that story is the romance, and it sort of builds where we're going. You know, what is the place going to look like? I need that to. It's the literary part of me, and so these, and I think that's real important when you think about what you're going to submit. I think you need the romance, something that is going to be the narrative, as we were talking about, that's going to catch the juror's eye and think this is charming, wonderful, beautiful, whatever, and it all makes sense of what they're looking at. So I don't even know what we're looking at. Okay, so this this is Kiowa, and Kiowa, this building, the romance here is it was built about 15 or so years ago, and one morning it burned to the ground. And it was a beloved shingle-style building that was built by an architectural firm in Connecticut, Shope, Reno, and Wharton. And it was very beloved on the island. So it was brought back, and Stan Dixon was hired to do the interior architecture, and I was to do the interior design. And we wanted to make it local, so it was had a very strong sense of place. So I used local pottery, the sweetgrass baskets, all the colors of the Low Country, the pluff mud, the purple of the grasses, the greens. It was river recovered cypress was in the bar, and all the light, well, not all the light fixtures, but a lot of the light fixtures had oyster shells. So everything about it just had a sense of where you were. So when you walked in, you thought, I am in the Low Country, I'm in Kiowa, I'm in South Carolina. So this is what I'd call a project that's needed history, new history created. And that's what this job, that's what you're looking at. My second project, I'm sorry, I'm going so fast. My second project that I'll tell you about is in the Upper Peninsula, and here it is. It's in a place called Harbor Springs, Michigan, and it is what I call a generational resort. It's families come here time and time again. My clients are third generation owners, and this home is what they call a cottage. So it's a Victorian cottage, 4 floors, and they are what I said, they are not tear-downers, they're fixer-uppers. And so this home was built in 1880, and when we started the restoration, we saved everything, all the doorknobs, the doors, the toilets, the sinks, the tubs, all the fixtures, an old refrigerator that was like 8 feet wide, all the floors, the windows, everything was taken away, restored, and then we put it back and used all those different things. What you're looking at, this is part of the original architecture. But we wanted to feel like a summer home, so it was all a summer resort. You don't go there any other time because of the snow, and it's very difficult. And this particular place closes down right after Labor Day. So it is what I call carrying on history. So we've created a new history with one, and we're carrying on history with the other one. So what you're looking at is these are the stones that are local to the area, and I don't even know what to say. You know, this is sort of the end of what I think. So that's it. And there's a lot. I'm sorry I have so many photographs. Yeah, well, thank you. So, I mean, we'll take questions later if that's good. So thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, so we go from the matriarch like Jackie and Stan to new kid on the block, me. Um, Not the matriarch Jackie. First of all, it's such an honor to be here. Even more so an honor to have been a part of the ceremony back in February. It's just an incredible thing to have my name on something associated with Philip Shutze. It's incredible. A couple of things that I think are important in my particular submission, which was a wonderful little cottage we did down in North Florida. Let's see if I can get this. Got it. Better? So this project it's the beginning portion of a much bigger plantation compound that we're working on. We're currently starting the design and construction of the main house. But these particular clients wanted to start with this little 800 square foot guest cottage. We were strictly limited to 800 square feet because of city, county regulations. And so from the beginning, our vision of this project was to create a house that a lot of the words that have already been touched on by Catherine and Jackie had a sense of place, a sense of romance, and a sense of history. And so a lot of the things that using that as our kind of driving force, this house began to take place, began to become in its own a really special place that I knew would be a candidate for a Shutze Award. I never would have dreamed it would actually win one, to be honest. So our submission did sort of try to capture those things, starting with a sense of place. Our narrative here is kind of broken down into paragraphs. We won't read all of it, of course, but I tried to convey a little bit to the jurors the intent, but without getting too flowery, too adjective-y. I kind of let that happen through the photography and through some of the captions. Here's our image, kind of the lead-off image that we use to sort of paint the picture up front. Now, as you can imagine, this being an 800 square foot cottage on a great piece of property, though, we didn't have an enormous design budget for this. So I didn't have $1 million to go spend on photography. So what I did is I found, we had a local builder who found a local photographer who, believe it or not, photographed this house for me for $300. Now, the photography was not fantastic. It was very saturated. It was super overdone. So I had to call on some Photoshop skills to dial things back. But as a younger firm, as a smaller firm, I just didn't have the budget to get the enormous photography in there. But we made it work. Again, capturing, like Jackie was saying, the light through the oaks, the sense of romance is captured here to create a sense of place. That was essentially the driving force behind what we did here. Using photography to capture the overall view instead of zeroing in on every little detail. In architecture, it's real easy to really start falling in love with the chimney caps and the porches and the column caps and the all the little details that we love. But I think the important thing about capturing a sense of place would be to present the whole picture and let the captions do the talking. Let the captions just briefly touch on the things that I intended for the photography to hint at. Another thing about this with the, again, I'm not a big firm. Believe it or not, it was actually myself, down here with the photographer, scooting around these green chairs, moving around things, bringing a carload of my books, my things from my office, just to help stage this project. Luckily, we did have a client who had wonderful taste and who, a lot of her interiors did help to capture that little sense of naivety that we were looking for in this house. It's not super polished. It's not dialed up just to the nth degree. It still has a little humbleness to it. This image, I think, is a really good one to capture what I'm talking about in terms of just showing the whole space and not drawing too much attention to every little detail of it. More here, more views. We like to capture and really show off some of the special materials we use in terms of the brick, the floors, the shiplap ceilings. Again, not by shining floodlights on them, but by showing them in their context. More of the same here. Another thing that I thought was important with this particular picture is the way it gave the house, although it's very, very little, a nice sense of scale and depth. You have the the hard-working little kitchen there, but then in the distance, it's a bedroom. We kind of worked hard to show off the depth of the way the floor plan works out here. Little details, as painful as it was to photograph a bathroom like this, as tiny as it is, there she is. Another thing that I thought was important was to convey the full process, you know, the full beginning to end, concept to completion, and let the jurors see that our concepts did really become what we intended them to become. So some of my early drawings, these are very, very early drawings, showing you know, floor plans, elevations, just painting the picture with broad strokes at this point. Moving down into more kind of presentation drawings that we sent to clients. This is one of my really early watercolor renderings. Even early interior renderings, if you bounce back to you know, some of these shots like this, you know, and this was 10 months before. So I thought that was kind of interesting for jurors to see the process, like I said. It's clear, simple, like Catherine said, really easy to read floor plans, not giving away too much, but just painting the picture so the jurors can get the full sense of the scope of the project. Little elevation shots here. And some of the interior sketches, again, just to show the process. And down to even little mantle details, showing side by side my original concept beside the built version. You know, another thing I think was really important with this project, like I said, I didn't set out for this to be a submission, but as construction continued to happen, and as I started seeing that so many of the details that I designed were being executed so well, you know, it kind of became apparent that this could very well be a successful entry. And so I think that recognizing when those elements are executed well was a critical thing. I think that's about it for me. Any questions? Or we'll have questions later, right? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Dawn Fritz, and I'm the marketing manager for Historical Concepts. And for those of you who may not know of our firm, we've been here in Atlanta for 30 years. Not as well known in the Atlanta area, but we've done a lot of work around the country. And in my 15 years with the firm, I went back and counted today, and I've done 65 award entries in that time. And then I thought, well, how many have been successful? I counted, and I got to about 24 or 25, so that's about 1 in 3. I don't know if that's good. I don't know if that's bad. I don't know what kind of record that is, but I certainly know that I've learned a lot over the years in putting these award entries together, so I'm gonna share a little bit of my perspective with you on that, and it may not be the right way or the best way. And then as I look around the room, I see a lot of others who have submitted a lot of winning award entries as well. So you may have, you know, some other things to add. So feel free, if you've got a question throughout, or if you have something to add, feel free to do so. About 15 years ago, there were just a handful of award programs, and today there are a lot of opportunities between the Palladio Awards and all of the chapter awards with the ICAA, the Southern Home Awards. A lot of ways to really get your work out and to get recognition for it. But that being said, there's a lot of competition now, and the expectations for your award entries are much higher. I believe that you've all received or will receive tonight the guidelines for the Shutze Awards, and I'm not going to get into the mechanics of that, but I'm just going to focus on tips, tricks, things that I've learned for putting together a quality entry. Give you some things to think about and ideas that you can apply to the Shutze Awards or to any award program. So you've picked your project, you've found your best work, you've pulled together some great photography, some good drawings, and you've written that romantic story that Jackie talked about. How do you take those and convey that to the jury? Well, believe it or not, this is it. This little black notebook is the only chance you have to tell the jury about your project. And what you put in its pages is so very important. So the one key takeaway that I have for you tonight is presentation matters. The way you present your work, both visually or narratively, can have a significant impact, as Catherine mentioned, on how it's perceived by the jury. You really need to convey your enthusiasm for the project through this notebook. You have no other way. The jury's not going to get to tour your project. You can't make a presentation to them. They can't ask you questions. So convey your enthusiasm here and really make the case for your project in its pages. So if you've had a chance to look at the guidelines, or if you've done one of these before, you'll know that the committee will give you some very specific submittal requirements that you need to the way that you need to put together your presentation. You need to do it in a very specific way, and there's some very specific materials that they ask for. So you might be asking yourself, how then do I make my entry stand out against all of the 85 or so entries that they received last year, for example, in the Shutze Awards? So I'm going to go through one of our winning entries from last year and give you some basic things, things that you probably already know, but I'm going to say them anyway, and then just illustrate some thoughts. Just some general tips before I start talking about the content. After you've gathered all your materials, it's now just about assembling all of those in a very cohesive way. So the first very simple thing to do is to choose a title for your project. You can't use the project name. You can't use the address. You don't want to choose anything that will allow the jury to know who you are or where the project is located. So I usually just tend to choose a very simple descriptive name to carry throughout. In this case, I called it the Wood River Valley Residence. Then one of the first key decisions that you need to make in putting together your award notebook is the orientation. Are you going to present your materials in a portrait format or landscape format? And really, you can do it either way. In this case, I chose to do the landscape format just because it worked better with the proportions of the particular project that I was showing and the photographs that I had. You can do it either way, so look at your materials and decide, but I would highly discourage you from kind of changing your orientation within the project. I can't really speak for a juror, but I know when I'm looking through them, if I have to turn the notebook from side to side, it's just distracting. So work with what you have and do the best that you can to kind of keep it to one particular orientation. Another thing, very obvious and simple, but consider your font size. You talked about the size of the photos, but also consider the size of your font. The jury needs to read this, and it needs to be clear, so pick a very readable font. You can be creative and pick something that goes, with the theme of your project or what you want to convey, but really 12 points, is the way to go. I wouldn't go any smaller than, 12 or 11 points at the smallest on that. And then just in general, graphic design principles. Brandon, yours was excellent in terms of the amount of white space you had, and your simple text is really just a charming entry. Just consider your white space, your layout, your borders, and just try to keep that all consistent throughout in what you tried to do. So now let's go ahead and look at this entry page by page, and I'll just give you some thoughts. This is our project summary. This is the first thing that the jury gets to read about your project. Now I'm going to point out, this summary is about 600 words. This year, I'm told that the Shutze Committee is going to limit you to 300 words, so half of this. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it's going to really force you to focus on the summary, and just think of it more as, that little paragraph that you see at the back of the book that tells you about it. Tell the jury what they need to know about the setting and the context, and then give them a teaser of the story you're about to tell through your photographs and drawings. And one key thing, I think, it might be obvious, but when you're telling this story here, direct the jury's attention to your scope of work and your design approach so that they clearly know this is, they're going to know what category it's in, but talk about what you did and what your contribution was to the project. 300 words is roughly half of what you see here, but you are, as Brandon noted, going to have the opportunity to really expand on your story through the captions that are going to go along with your visuals. And a lot of times the way that I do it is I take all of my visuals, I write my entire story around that, just as I would a chapter in a book, and then I break it down with the captions that go along with each visual. In this particular case, I chose to include a picture. on this project summary page, and that's not something that you need to do or is required. I just wanted to kind of establish a little context for the setting, the rural setting here. If you do something like that, just know that that counts as one of your photos, and I believe you have a maximum of 20 photos that you can submit, so it will count, even if you put a small photo there. I think the minimum this year is 10 photos that you need to show. Liza, next slide. We kicked off our entry then with a site plan, and it's important to note that drawings for most categories are not required, but it was important to us because we wanted to convey sort of how you progress through the property, how the different buildings related to each other and to the site. So we chose to include that. It's up to you to decide what kind of drawings you think you need to convey your work and your project. If you're an interior designer, for example, and you were responsible for doing all of the interior elevations on the project and you're very proud of those, include those drawings, not just photographs of the finished work. The juror seeing that work product, especially the charming drawings that Brandon showed with the really painted a picture with the smoke coming out of the chimney, those are just wonderful things to add to your entry. And then just before we move on, just a general tip. As you put your award entry together, think about how you order your materials. As we go through this entry, you'll see that I like to first lay the groundwork with the narrative, and then use the drawings to create some foreshadowing and maybe build up a little anticipation for, ooh, what does this project look like now that it's finished? And then reveal the finished project through the photos. Go to the next slide. Again, optional. For the architecture category, we think they're important, obviously, showing the elevations for the project. And you can show them in any format. I love Brandon's elevations. This is another format that someone in our office chose to use, where they took the CAD drawings and overlaid them in Photoshop on a background. And so you can really do whatever you'd like to do here to convey the drawings. And again, just pointing out that you have the captions, which will allow you to point out salient features of what the jury is seeing here. So again, you can expand on your message. Next one. And again, this is just some side elevations. Again, we don't always include all 4 elevations. It really depends on the project. In this particular one, we thought it was important. Next slide. And here's the floor plan, again, a very important piece for most of the entries. We chose to do a very simple labeling because of the size of the house and the number of the rooms, but certainly you can just lay the titles over the rooms if you'd like. And we don't typically need to call out all spaces, just the major key rooms, and it's a good way to just kind of reinforce the program for the project and to show some of the key relationships and flow throughout the rooms. Okay, this is where we get to the fun part, the photographs. As has been said already, professional photographs are not required, but the composition and quality certainly affects the jury's perception of the projects. So if you can make the investment in professional photography, I highly recommend it. If you can't, don't let it discourage you from entering, but you're going to have to do a lot more work and spend a lot more time really making sure you get good photography. As you take your photos, look at each shot through the jury's eye or through an editor's eye. Take the time to do some light staging, clean up, put the toilet seat down, remove any distracting personal items from the counters. Just do whatever you can. Think like a magazine editor, think like a juror, and just do the best you can with your photography. I like to approach the design of the notebook, and especially the photo section, like you would approach the design of the various rooms in the house. You want to establish sort of a natural hierarchy, so hence starting with the front. And then there should be a pleasing flow and a consistent rhythm from room to room, or in this case, from page to page. You want to be able to focus on the details, but you also want to consider the whole. And so I always look at it and think about the overall mood and aesthetic that we want to convey, and then once I've laid out the photos, ask if that mood and aesthetic show through the photos that I've selected. And then I also like to treat the photo section like a tour through the house, so with a logical progression through the spaces. And with a clear beginning, sort of middle and end that matches the story, so to speak. And you know, you can't show every space in the project, so why not take charge of that tour and choose those rooms that really best express your design aesthetic and that were executed extremely well, and focus on those. You don't need to show every space. And then in terms of page layout, again, I went with the horizontal or landscape here. And as Catherine said, a big photo really is best, but sometimes when you don't want to change that orientation of the page, you can't do that. So I at least try to go as big as I can with the photos and have some consistency. As we flip through these first 3 slides, you'll see they're identical in terms of the borders and the orientation of the photos and the captions. Then when we get to our next slide, you'll see that I've mixed it up a little bit, and I have 2 portrait orientation photos side by side, but I've still maintained the same general proportions of the page and borders. And when I do look at putting more than 1 photo per page, do know that those count towards your limit. That counts as 2 photos, even if it's on 1 page. And I do like them to at least work together or illustrate some sort of aspect of the design or convey a theme. In this case, I wanted to show this same architectural element from the interior and the exterior, and the orientation of the pictures allowed me to do that. And it also allowed me to point out some of the key elements that I wanted the jurors to see in the caption below. Now, going to the next slide, a little bit of a break from convention and a little bit against Catherine's wisdom, because I've got 3 photos on a slide, and I've got a very small one in the middle. But I thought I had a compelling reason to do that, and that was because this is the great room for the project, but I didn't want the jurors to focus on the overall room. I really wanted them to see some of the architectural detailing in the room. So I went with a small photo just to convey the context, and then I cropped in on 2 other photos on either side that really show the size and scale of the millwork here. And so that allowed me to really direct the jurors to that element. And then in going to the next slide, looking at the keeping room, again, 2 complementary images side by side, using the caption to call out the key elements like the timber framing, the pierced panels, the paneled millwork, and the kind of the subtle things like the changing direction of the floors and why that was done. And we can move on from that one. That's another one of the keeping room. Nope, that's fine. And then just another one of the keeping room, and then the next slide, looking through that panel into the kitchen. And one important thing that I'd like to point out is that you can use the captions to tell the jurors what they see, but you can also use it to tell them what they don't see. So in this particular case, there was some pretty neat technology that was incorporated behind the counters to deal with kind of the very extreme temperatures in the glass here. And so I was able to tell the jurors about that in my caption, and that's not something they would otherwise know. And then just going to this slide again, I mentioned you don't need to show every room, but you don't need to just show the large rooms. These corridors were really interesting, and there was some really fun architectural details that played into the story here. So I wanted to show these. For example, the photo on the left, there are these interior windows that help with shared light. So I wanted to talk about that. And then the photo on the right is a corridor that leads down to the bedroom, and it has this full wall of glass that creates this glassed-in breezeway effect. So I thought these spaces, though small, were really charming and talked to the details of the project and some of the architectural elements. And then again, another side-by-side, here again telling a story side-by-side, looking at the exterior of this bedroom wing, and then an interior shot of the same window and same space, and really in the caption playing upon sort of the intentional outbuilding massing here, and then how those materials were carried to the inside with the heavy stone and timbers. And then the final slide, we wrap up, as Catherine said, a really good closing image is key, something that's going to make a lasting impression on the jury. It's going to mark the end of the journey through the house or through the space and bring the story to a close. So that's how I approached putting together this particular entry, and having done so many over the years, it's just kind of what the pattern that I've gotten used to and what has worked best for me. But I know that, as I said, there's others of you in the room, so if anyone has any suggestions, please, feel free to share those. The final thing I would say is once you've kind of put this all together, there's some things that, I would suggest you do. I usually finish it up, step back, look at it, and just try to imagine that I don't know the project. And then I try to ask myself, are these materials in this notebook enough to give the jury the context they need? Do they clearly convey my firm's contributions to the project, but also to a certain aspect talk about the teamwork involved? And then are the merits of your work well articulated in your narrative and through your photos? Last but not least, I guess, these are obvious things, but I guess I'd be remiss if I left them out. Proofread, proofread, proofread. Do not send in something with misspellings, bad grammar, or just some sort of technical error on it. Print out your entry and make sure it looks as good on paper as it does on screen. A lot of times photos may print darker just because of your equipment. So, take the time to do that well in advance of the deadline in case you need to make any tweaks. And then before you send it off, be sure you go back through the guidelines and make sure you follow them to the letter. There will be supplemental forms that you may be required to provide. There may be some digital files that you are required to provide, and those do take time at the end of the entry to do. So, once you finish your notebook, you do have some other housekeeping to keep up with. So, as Catherine said, don't risk being disqualified or having your entry thrown out because you don't follow those guidelines. And then one final thing, even if you've put a lot of effort into this entry and you don't win the award, as was said, you can always resubmit your award. The juries change every year, and there's nothing wrong with taking that same entry, making sure you've updated it for any new guidelines, the previous year, and then resubmitting. And we've actually done that, and we've won the second time around, so it's certainly worth doing, and it doesn't take much effort on your part. And then just the final thing, if you don't win the award, the time you've invested on this is still well spent. You can consider how you could repurpose this entry to help you with your marketing, especially the smaller firms out here or the independent shops. For us, there's always a prospective client who wants to know how do we approach a design. Or there might be a magazine editor that's looking for content. So we've gone back to these entries and actually just done some small tweaks to remove the anonymity, to put our name and our branding on them, but generally the same format. And then we have something at the ready. Now we've got this large library of 65 award entries that we've done that showcase some of our best work. So it's something that you can easily convert into a marketing piece, even if you don't win the award. That's pretty much what I've got tonight. Liza, are you going to take some questions or? Okay. Thank you.
Hey there. Funny about following Dawn. Norman used to work with Norman Askins, and I was responsible for the first 5 years of Shutze submissions. And I remember also being on the jury in later years and calling historical concepts. And Dawn answered the phone, and I was like, Dawn, she said, this is Dawn Fritz. And I was like, hi, Dawn, congratulations on your winning submission. And thinking that she had been the architect of it because I saw her name year after year. So the point being is that the people who put this together in your office are instrumental in making this a successful submission. And I'm not saying that the principals don't have a big hand in that, but we always have people who help us out. So be mindful that they get all the information that I'm about to share anyway. Also, one of the reasons, having been involved in the jury for years and years and years in terms of jury support, the process leading up to submissions, there's also a pretty funny story of when I was during that first submission, I went to Sam Flax, bought a brown leather binder for this first submission. It was so exciting. It looked beautiful. That brown leather binder was still in circulation every year during submittals until 2 years ago. So I guarantee you that somewhere along the way, someone had seen the brown leather binder and kind of knew where it was coming from. So this is also one of the reasons that we want this to be the best way to showcase your work. We also want it to be the most fair. We never want there to be a question of whether the jurors knew who was submitting. So that's, even though I'm taking the part of housekeeping and the police, I don't mean to convey that this is something that is intended to stifle your creativity. It certainly isn't. And I think everybody has already spoken to how it can be a real plus. So let's go over really quickly. There are two things that I have to present today. One, just briefly going over what you're going to find when you go on the website. If you look at your call for entries book, it has information, the insert has information, but some of it is not. You would be very well served to go on to the full document on the website once that is up and running when you're ready to submit, just to make sure that you have a checklist, you print it out, you look at it, and you compare when you're ready to put your submission together. Dawn spoke about the binder, which has now gone missing. They're okay. If everyone wants to look at the binder, let me walk over here and get one. Sorry. No worries. Okay, so the binder seems very kind of binder. Well, the point of the binder is, A, to keep it all anonymous. That's nice, but it also gives the jurors a chance to have all the information at their fingertips. It also, one of the things, we have a delightful gentleman who at Georgia Tech who receives each and every entry. And 85 entries are a lot of entries, and he does this as a volunteer because of his enthusiasm for the process. His name is Tom Greisen, wonderful man. So he receives all of your entries. He ensures that they are cataloged, numbered, so that and then he sends them over to Miami Circle, to Fusion at Miami Circle for the jurors to look at. All of that is cataloged, all of that is completely anonymous by the time it gets to the jurors. So one of the reasons that we've done this is to make his job easier too. So we have the infamous half-inch binder. They're not expensive and they're easy to find, which is great. As we've talked about, as everyone's talked about in terms of number of photographs, one of the best things about this is you get to edit. One of the things that wasn't said, and you'll see this when you go online, adding north arrows, scales, titles, things that really are essential and very easy to include on your drawings and on captions on the photographs and on the drawings, and really are vital when looking at a submission. We also felt very strongly that pages of text, while you feel like there's a lot to say about this project, we got feedback from all of the jurors each year that if there's a lot of text, they just don't have time to read it and they'll skip over it. And something very important that you might have wanted to say may have been 2 pages into that presentation. So don't let that, in addition with dark photographs or other obvious problems, be the reason that very, very important sentence or concept or thought or the spirit of the project was overlooked. Let's see. And when you win a Shutze Award, and you will eventually, it's very important for us, Dawn spoke to the housekeeping issues of filling out your forms. Tedious, I understand. But if you are a winner, we need photo releases. All of those are documents that are necessary when we're putting together the awards presentation for public relations afterwards. It's a very sticky situation if we want to publish the hard copy of your work in the program or in the in following materials or put it up on our website when those photographs have been taken by someone who is also going to submit them, one of your other partners may be submitting them to a magazine. And we've had real problems with that kind of territorial fight of, you know, we'll have winners call us and say, listen, could you not put that in there because that has already been spoken for and I didn't realize it. Well, that's a problem when you're on a limited time schedule and you don't, then you end up with not enough photographs for your presentation, your winning presentation. So please do be mindful. Photo releases, photos that you can be used for PR, and the DPI, high presentation quality. These presentations have been phenomenal, and they look like copy-ready book or magazine presentations, and it's not hard to do these days. It is hard to do. Don't let me, I'm sorry, that sounded like it was, it is very hard to get to this. The technology has made it easier, right? Thank you. Sorry about that, Dawn. But it's something that we all have access to some technology that can help us do this. So make sure that your photos are of a quality that can be reproduced in print. And it's very specifically, it's specified right here. So as I said, go online for any of the particulars on the submissions. It seems very much like we've done a lot of tightening the reins. But the reason for this is your submissions are of such quality and are at such a level, and the bar has been raised so high that unless we follow your lead and become as professional in this process as you are in your work life and in your submissions, we're not going to reflect the talent and the gift we have from your participation. So much of this is raising our own bar as well. The other exciting news that I have is we also have this year, and please, if you're not a student in our midst, do let anyone you know, anyone in your office, if you're not that is a student or an emerging professional that may have work that they have done either in school or on their own, or within your office, if you feel comfortable for them to submit that. We're doing a Student Emerging Professional Award for this year and upcoming years. This is really exciting because what it's doing is this is the future of our professions, and we're starting to encourage their participation in this particular world that we love so much. And we're encouraging also the excellence of work that we want to keep pursuing as we go on. So very clumsily said, that was clumsily said, but it is a very, very important message. It's open to young professionals, recent graduates, and current students. It does not have an age limit, and I feel very strongly that this should be said because I graduated when I was in my 30s with 2 tiny small children, and that was important to me. I was an emerging professional. I had been a student, but I was in my 30s, so a little long in the tooth, I get it, but we come in all ages. So it can be in any of our fields that are any of the same fields that the regular Shutze awards are awarded, including craftsmanship and preservation, which is something that's interesting. It has to have been completed within 3 years of graduation or less, as everyone has to be current members of the ICA. I think that's important regardless, and that kind of should be understood. It's in the Southeast region. So we're going to be reaching out to the schools. We hope that you will let people know and encourage those in your firms that if they would like to enter the Shutze Awards, and the entry fee is less, of course, it's a $25 entry fee, to encourage so that we can build this particular area of the awards. So I will turn it back over to Terry, and as I'm sure everyone's going to have questions for the panel. Thank you.